The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving the Navy base in Norfolk slick with puddles and shining asphalt. Sailors moved in lines, some heading toward the mess hall, others jogging under the gray sky. The base felt alive with routine, yet within that routine, newcomers always stood out. Ensign Claire Donovan knew that all too well. She walked across the courtyard with her cap tucked under her arm, her uniform crisp, her boots hitting the pavement in steady rhythm. At 26, she carried herself with a calm confidence that seemed older than her years. Her brown hair was neatly pulled back, her face steady and unreadable. But what drew the eyes of those around her wasn't her face or her uniform. It was the tattoo. On her left forearm, barely hidden by the sleeve she rolled up while carrying her duffel, was an intricate black and gray design. Sharp lines, circles, and a strange symbol inside a triangle. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't the kind of tattoo sailors usually got after too much whiskey in a port city. This one was precise, thoughtful, almost sacred, and the moment one of the petty officers noticed it, the whispering began. "Hey, check out Donovan's arm," a voice muttered from behind. Claire ignored it. She had learned long ago not to give oxygen to mockery. But then the laughter came, louder this time, from a young lieutenant walking past with his crew. Lieutenant Mason Clark. Everyone knew him. Tall, cocky, and always smiling at the wrong time. The kind of officer who thought he was funnier than he really was. "Nice ink, Ensign," Mason called out, smirking as his buddies turned to look. "What's that supposed to be? A bad math problem? Or maybe a secret recipe for soup?" The group laughed. Claire kept walking. She didn't flinch. She didn't speed up. She just tightened her grip on her duffel bag and kept her eyes forward. That only made him press further. "Oh, come on, don't be shy. Let's see it." "What's it mean? You got bored in art class? Or maybe it's just one of those new age girl power things, huh?" The laughter grew, bouncing across the courtyard like cruel echoes. Claire stopped then. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head and looked at Mason. Her eyes were steady, calm, almost too calm. "You wouldn't understand," she said softly. And she walked on. That morning, during orientation, the whispers followed her. Every time she rolled up her sleeve, eyes went straight to the tattoo. Some whispered it looked like some cult symbol. Others joked it was a cheap imitation of Navy SEAL insignia. Nobody dared ask her directly, not after she brushed Mason off, but the story spread faster than wildfire. By lunch, half the junior officers had heard about Donovan's weird tattoo. And by dinner, Mason Clark wasn't finished with her. The mess hall was loud with chatter and trays clattering. Claire sat by herself at the far end, picking at her chicken and rice. She wasn't lonely. She was used to being alone, but she was tired. Tired of the staring, tired of the whispers. She'd worked harder than anyone else to get here. She had spent years training, years proving herself. Years ignoring the noise of those who thought a woman like her didn't belong in Naval Combat Command. And now it was all being reduced to a joke about a tattoo. Mason walked in with his group, loud as ever. He spotted her immediately. "Hey, Donovan," he called across the room. "Tell us, what's the big secret? That tattoo mean you're part of a witch's coven or something?" The hall chuckled. Some looked down at their trays, uncomfortable. Others grinned, waiting for drama. Claire didn't respond. She lifted her fork, took a slow bite, and kept her eyes on her plate. Mason wasn't satisfied. He strode across the hall, his boots clanging against the floor, and stood at her table. His smile was wide, but there was a sharpness in his eyes. "You know, people are starting to talk. Tattoos like that, symbols like that, they don't belong here. You trying to play tough, Donovan? Or are you just desperate for attention?" Claire finally looked up at him. Her voice was steady, her tone even. "Sit down, Lieutenant. Enjoy your dinner." The way she said it, calm, commanding, without a trace of fear, made a few nearby sailors shift uncomfortably. Mason scoffed. "Oh, come on. What, you think you're above us now? Just because you've got some mystery symbol on your arm? I bet it doesn't mean a thing, just ink, just a joke." He leaned closer, lowering his voice but not his smirk. "Face it, Donovan. Nobody here's going to take you seriously." Claire didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply gathered her tray, stood up, and walked out of the mess hall without another word. But inside, her chest burned, not with shame, not with anger. With memory, that tattoo wasn't a joke. It wasn't random. It wasn't girl power, it was a legacy, a code, a mark of sacrifice that most sailors would never understand. And someday, sooner than Mason Clark could ever imagine, he would regret mocking it. The next morning, the base buzzed with news. The Admiral himself was arriving for inspection. Admiral Harris was a legend, a man who'd served for decades, known for being sharp-eyed, cold, and absolutely intolerant of weakness. His presence made even seasoned officers nervous. When his car rolled onto the base, sailors stood straighter. When he walked into the courtyard, silence followed him like a shadow. The inspection began, his voice booming as he questioned officers and checked routines. Claire stood in line, her face calm, her sleeve rolled slightly as she held her rifle at attention. That's when Mason struck again. As Admiral Harris passed, Mason leaned toward another officer, his voice just loud enough to carry. "Better hide your arm, Donovan. Wouldn't want the Admiral thinking you're part of some comic book club." A few muffled laughs. Claire didn't move, but then the Admiral stopped. He turned his head. His sharp eyes locked on Claire's arm. The courtyard froze. For the first time all day, Admiral Harris's expression softened. Just barely, but enough to notice. He stepped closer, slowly, his hand lifted, pointing toward her tattoo. "Where did you get that?" His voice was low, measured. The silence was crushing. Mason's smirk faltered. Claire straightened her back. Her voice was clear. "Sir, it was my father's. I wear it in his honor." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Then, to everyone's shock, his face changed. He leaned in, so close only she could hear, and whispered something. Words that drained the color from Mason Clark's face. Words that made Claire's throat tighten with memory. And in that moment, the laughter died. Because whatever the Admiral whispered, it was something Mason Clark would never forget. The courtyard stood frozen after Admiral Harris bent close to Ensign Claire Donovan and whispered those quiet, heavy words in her ear. No one else heard them, but everyone saw the change in his eyes, the almost reverent way he looked at her tattoo. And just like that, the Admiral moved on, his boots clicking against the wet pavement, his voice booming again as he barked at the next officer in line. But the air had shifted. The same sailors who'd laughed with Mason now stared at Claire, differently, curious, nervous. Mason himself stood rigid, his smirk gone, his eyes darting between Claire and the Admiral like he'd missed a critical piece of a puzzle. Claire kept her expression steady. She didn't show relief. She didn't show pride. She only kept her stance straight, her chin level, her breathing calm, because she knew the truth. Admiral Harris had recognized it, her father's mark. That evening, as the base returned to its routines, Mason couldn't let it go. He cornered Claire outside the barracks, his voice sharp, his confidence cracked but not destroyed. "What was that about?" he demanded. "What did the Admiral say to you?" Claire didn't slow her step. "It's none of your business, Lieutenant." "Don't walk away from me," Mason snapped, catching up to her. "I'm not stupid. That symbol means something, something big. And if the Admiral knows it, then I want to know it too." Claire stopped then, turning her head just enough to meet his gaze. "You don't want to know," she said softly. Mason bristled. "Don't give me that mysterious act. You think you're better than everyone? You think just because you've got some family tattoo, the Admiral's going to hand you promotions?" Claire's voice stayed level, but her words cut deeper than he expected. "I think you should focus on doing your job, Lieutenant, because symbols don't make leaders. Actions do." And she walked away, leaving him seething. That night, Claire sat alone on her bunk, the tattoo visible under the dim barracks light. She traced the lines with her finger, the ink now more than art, more than memory. It was blood, it was loss. It was her father's voice carried through time. Her father, Captain Daniel Donovan, had been a name whispered with respect in certain circles of the Navy. Not the loud kind of fame, no medals plastered across newspapers, no headlines. But the kind that mattered more. The kind whispered in strategy rooms. The kind remembered by the men and women who owed their lives to him. He had been part of a covert unit in the early days of the War on Terror. A team that didn't exist on paper, sent into places no map showed. Missions buried in classified files. Operations that saved thousands, though no one would ever know their names. And the symbol? It was their code. A silent badge of honor among the few who had survived those missions. Claire had been 16 when she last saw him. He pressed a note into her hand before leaving for what he promised was Just another assignment. She never saw him again. But she carried his words, and later the tattoo he'd left behind now. Standing under the Admiral's gaze, she realized something chilling. Harris had been there. He had known her father. And he knew what the tattoo meant. The next day, training intensified. Admiral Harris was still on base, watching with hawk-like precision. Drills, weapons practice, tactical exercises, the kind that separated the strong from the weak. Claire didn't falter. She ran harder than the others. Climbed faster. Shot straighter. Not because she wanted to impress Harris, but because she had trained her entire life in silence, with the weight of proving herself on her back. But Mason wasn't done. He pushed harder too, only not out of discipline, but out of pride. He wanted to outshine her. He wanted to prove to everyone that she was nothing but a tattoo and a mystery. During a live-fire exercise in the rain-soaked field, Mason stepped in front of her, blocking her shot. "What's the matter, Donovan? Afraid to miss?" "Move," Claire said, her voice steady. But he didn't. He fired first. His shot wide, his smirk triumphant. She adjusted, breathed, and with one calm squeeze of the trigger, struck dead center. The instructor raised his brows, scribbling notes. Mason's jaw tightened. That night the whispers grew louder. Not about her tattoo this time, but about her skill. Some said she was lucky. Others said the Admiral had already chosen her as a favorite, but Mason's jealousy boiled hotter. And then came the storm. It was near midnight when the alarm blared through the base. A drill, at least that's what most assumed. Sirens wailed, boots thudded against concrete, officers shouted orders. Simulated raid. "Move, move, move!" Claire grabbed her gear, sprinting with the others into the rain. Flashing lights cut through the darkness. Thunder rolling overhead. It was chaos by design. A test of reaction, of leadership, of endurance. The teams spread out across the field, moving through mud and water, ducking under barriers, scaling walls. Claire's team moved fast, but Mason, placed as her unit leader, was reckless. "Forward." "Don't stop," he barked, ignoring signals, ignoring caution. Claire saw it before he did. A tripwire across the path, barely visible in the mud. She reached for his arm. "Mason, stop." He yanked away. "I give the orders here." And he ran straight into it. The explosion of sound and light rocked the field. Not lethal, but close enough to drop him to his knees, stunned and disoriented. Smoke billowed. Rain hissed as it hit sparks. The rest of the team froze. Claire didn't. She surged forward, dragging Mason out of the kill zone, barking orders with a sharpness that snapped the others into action. "Cover left." Johnson watched the ridge. "Move now." Her voice cut through the chaos like steel. She directed fire, shielded her team, pulled Mason back to cover. Within minutes, what could have been disaster turned into an organized retreat. By the time the drill ended, her team was the only one still intact. The instructors wrote furiously on their boards. Admiral Harris, standing under an umbrella in the storm, watched her every move. And Mason? He sat in the mud, chest heaving, shame burning hotter than the sparks still smoldering in the rain. Later, as the unit assembled for debrief, Harris stepped forward. His voice carried across the soaked courtyard. "Some of you treated this as a game tonight," he barked. And it showed. Sloppiness, arrogance, failure to observe the obvious. His eyes swept across the ranks. They landed squarely on Mason, then shifted to Claire. "But some of you understood. Leadership is not about barking orders. It is about seeing what others miss, acting when others freeze, sacrificing when others hesitate." The silence was absolute. Harris's gaze lingered on Claire's tattoo, just visible under the soaked sleeve. His voice dropped slower, heavier. "Your father would have been proud." A ripple of shock ran through the ranks. Some gasped quietly. Mason's face drained of color, because now the pieces clicked. The tattoo wasn't a joke. It was history. It was sacrifice. It was a bond to something far greater than any of them understood. And the Admiral's whisper carried a truth that none of them could laugh away anymore. But the storm wasn't over. For Mason, humiliation turned into obsession, and for Claire, the past was about to return in a way she never expected, bringing danger, memory, and a test far greater than a midnight drill. Because that tattoo? It wasn't just her father's. It was a warning, and the secret it carried would soon put her life and the lives of everyone around her, on the line. The base seemed quieter after that stormy night. Quieter but heavier. Conversations hushed when Claire passed by. Where once there had been smirks and laughter, there was now silence. Curious, uncertain, even cautious. But Mason Clark's eyes followed her like a shadow. He hadn't forgotten the humiliation. He hadn't forgotten being dragged from the mud, his command torn away in front of everyone. And worst of all, he hadn't forgotten the Admiral's words. Your father would have been proud. The phrase gnawed at him. What did it mean? What history did she carry on that arm of hers? He had to know. 3 days later, Mason slipped into the restricted records room under the excuse of training research. He scrolled through old files, operations buried under layers of clearance. But every time he thought he had found something, the trail went cold. Too many redactions, too many black lines. Finally, he stumbled on a faint breadcrumb. Operation Iron Crest. The file was mostly empty, but a name flickered in the footnotes. Captain Daniel Donovan. Mason leaned back in the chair, eyes wide. Claire's father. A ghost from the past, and in the margin of the scanned document, faint but visible, was the same symbol etched on Claire's skin. The tattoo wasn't just personal. It was official. A mark of an operation that still didn't exist on paper. Mason's chest tightened. He wasn't sure if he had uncovered something dangerous or if he had just stepped into something far bigger than himself. Meanwhile, Claire tried to keep her focus on the present. Training consumed her days, but nights brought restless thoughts. She couldn't forget the way Harris had looked at her tattoo, the way his voice had softened when he spoke of her father. There was something more, something he hadn't told her, and she was right. That Friday evening, she was called into Harris's office. The summons alone was enough to make younger officers panic. But Claire walked with steady steps, her cap tucked under her arm, her pulse sharp but controlled when she entered. Harris was standing by the window, the setting sun painting the glass orange. He didn't turn at first. You carry it well, he said quietly. Claire's hand instinctively went to her sleeve. Sir? The mark, the code. Most people wouldn't understand it. But those who do, never forget it. Finally he turned. His face was older now, the lines deeper, but his eyes still carried the weight of memory. Your father saved my life once, Harris said. Kunar Province, 2007. Operation Iron Crest. We were cut off, pinned down. I'd given up hope. But your father, he didn't quit. He carried me out on his back for 3 miles through hostile territory. He took 2 bullets doing it, and he never once complained. Claire's throat tightened. She remembered the folded flag, the letters, the hollow words at the funeral. But not this. No one had ever told her this. Harris stepped closer. His voice lowered. That tattoo, it wasn't just a symbol. It was their pact. Iron Crest was a unit of ghosts, men and women who lived and died in the shadows. No medals, no recognition. That ink was all they had, a mark of brotherhood, a mark of sacrifice. He studied her face. Do you know why I whispered to you that day? Claire shook her head. Because when I saw that mark on your arm, I knew you weren't just another officer. You're a reminder, a living piece of a legacy the Navy tried to bury. For the first time, Harris's voice cracked with something like emotion. Don't let anyone take that from you. Claire nodded, her chest tight. Yes, sir. But Harris's next words chilled her blood. Be careful who sees it. Not everyone would want that history remembered. Outside, the night air felt sharper. The world seemed heavier. Claire walked slowly back toward the barracks, Harris's warning echoing in her ears. Not everyone would want that history remembered, and she knew exactly who couldn't let it go. Mason confronted her the very next morning. He didn't wait for privacy this time. He cornered her outside the gym, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with a mix of desperation and arrogance. I know, he hissed. Claire froze. Know what? Operation Iron Crest. Her stomach dropped, but she kept her face still. You don't know what you're talking about, Mason smirked. Oh, I know enough. Your father, the great Captain Donovan, some kind of secret hero, right? That symbol's not a family doodle, it's a unit mark. Something classified. He leaned closer. And you've been hiding it like it makes you special. Claire's voice was ice. That information is restricted, Lieutenant. You shouldn't be digging where you don't belong. Mason laughed. Restricted, please. I deserve to know. I deserve the same respect you're suddenly getting. You think you've earned it? No, Donovan. You're riding on your father's ghost. Without that tattoo, you'd just be another name in the stack. The words hit hard, but Claire didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her eyes steady. You want to know the truth? That tattoo isn't about pride. It's about loss. It's about blood in the dirt and names on headstones. You wouldn't understand because you've never carried anyone out of the fire. You only know how to chase your own reflection. For once, Mason had no comeback. His jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed him. Confusion, maybe even shame. Claire turned and walked away. But Mason wasn't done. Not yet. That night, storms rolled in again. The base trembled with thunder. Claire sat at her desk, writing in her journal, the inked lines of her father's symbol resting under the desk lamp's glow. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were too close. Mason. He slipped into the barracks quietly, shutting the door behind him. His face was pale, his eyes unsettled. You don't get it, he said, voice trembling between anger and something else. If that symbol is what you say it is, it changes everything. My whole career, my whole path, I've been fighting for recognition, for respect, for something to make me matter. And you were born with it. Claire set her pen down. She rose slowly, keeping her voice calm. No, Mason, I wasn't born with it. I earned it. Every mile I ran alone. Every night I stayed up studying. Every drill, every bruise, every failure. My father's mark didn't put me here. My choices did. The storm cracked outside, lightning spilling across the room. Mason's fists clenched. His voice dropped. Then prove it. Claire narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? Out there tomorrow, field test. Just you and me. No teams, no backup. Let's see if you really deserve that ink, or if it's just a ghost holding your hand. The challenge hung in the air like thunder, and for the first time, Claire saw it in his eyes, not just arrogance but desperation. A man breaking under the weight of his own insecurity. She could have walked away. She could have reported him. But something inside her knew this was bigger than pride. This was about more than Mason. This was about proving once and for all that her father's legacy wasn't a burden. It was a torch, and she was ready to carry it. The next morning, the storm broke into clear skies. The field lay wide and empty, dew shining on the grass. Harris hadn't authorized it, but word traveled fast. By dawn, whispers circled the base. Donovan and Clark were going head-to-head. 2 reputations. 1 truth. Claire laced her boots, rolled her sleeve just high enough for the tattoo to catch the morning light, and walked onto the field. Mason was already there, rifle slung over his shoulder, jaw tight. He looked ready for war. Let's finish this, he muttered. Claire didn't answer. She just stepped into position, her pulse steady, her father's mark burning on her arm like fire. This wasn't about Mason anymore. This was about proving, to herself, to Harris, to the memory of her father, that no amount of laughter, no amount of mockery, no amount of doubt could ever silence the truth. And when the whistle blew, the test began. The whistle cut through the crisp morning air. On the field, 2 figures broke into motion, Ensign Claire Donovan and Lieutenant Mason Clark. No crowd was supposed to be there, but sailors gathered quietly along the edges, drawn by the whispers of what was about to happen. Even Admiral Harris, silent and watchful, stood at the far end, arms crossed, eyes sharp. The test had been simple, an endurance and tactical drill. Cross the field, scale obstacles, engage targets, and finish at the far ridge. It was meant for teams, not individuals. Certainly not a duel between 2 officers with pride at stake. But now it was more than that. It was respect, legacy, truth. Claire ran hard, boots pounding against wet grass, lungs pulling in sharp morning air. Mason was ahead at first, his legs longer, his stride reckless. He vaulted the first wall with a grunt, glancing back to smirk at her. Claire didn't chase. She measured each breath, each step. Her father had taught her once, fast doesn't matter. Smart does. She reached the wall, planted her boot, pulled herself over in one fluid motion. No wasted energy. No panic. Mason sprinted toward the shooting lane where pop-up targets waited in the distance. His first shots rang out loud and sloppy. 2 misses, 1 grazing hit. Claire dropped to one knee, steady hands on her rifle. She exhaled, squeezed. 1 shot, bullseye, another bullseye, 3rd. 4th, 5th, each one crisp, clean. Murmurs rippled through the sailors watching. Mason's jaw clenched. He fired faster, but faster meant worse. His rounds scattered, his frustration mounting. He wasn't just fighting targets. He was fighting himself. The next obstacle was the crawl pit. Mud, wire strung low, forcing them to grind forward on their bellies. Mason dove in head first, pulling himself furiously, splashing mud, grunting like a man possessed. Claire dropped in after him, slower, controlled. The mud soaked her uniform, smeared across her arms, but she kept moving, steady as rain. Halfway through, Mason's boot got caught in the wire. He yanked hard, too hard. The wire sliced into his sleeve, pinning him down. He cursed, tugging, thrashing, panic flashing in his eyes. Claire drew closer, sliding through the mud beside him. She could have passed him. She could have left him there to prove her point. But she didn't. Without a word, she reached up, pressed the wire down just enough for his boot to slip free. Then she crawled forward, never breaking rhythm. Mason froze for half a second, stunned. Then rage flooded his face, rage at her mercy, rage at himself. He scrambled after her. By the time they reached the climbing rope, Mason's arms were shaking. Mud weighed down his boots, sweat stung his eyes. He leapt for the rope, hands slipping once before gripping hard. Claire arrived seconds later. She grabbed the rope, planted her boots, and pulled upward. Her body steady, movements efficient. Mason grunted, pulling higher, trying to stay ahead. His arms trembled. His boots slipped. Halfway up, he faltered. Claire passed him silently, climbing smooth, her face calm. She reached the top, swung over, and descended on the far side. By the time Mason reached the ground, she was already moving toward the final stretch. The ridge. The last run was pure endurance, a half-mile sprint uphill. Rifle slung, legs burning, lungs screaming. Mason's desperation boiled over. He pushed harder, his strides ragged, breath tearing in his chest. Claire kept her rhythm. Step by step, breath by breath. The ridge drew closer, sunlight breaking over it, glowing on her arm where the tattoo peeked through the mud. The crowd was silent now, watching not a duel but a revelation. Mason stumbled once, twice, his vision blurred. His pride carried him a few more yards, but his body gave out before his will did. He collapsed, dropping to one knee in the grass, and Claire? She didn't look back. She didn't slow down. She ran steady, strong, the way her father had run through fire and bullets and darkness years ago. When she reached the ridge, she planted her boots, raised her rifle, and fired the final shot into the last target. Bullseye, the whistle blew. The field erupted in murmurs. Some clapped quietly. Others just stared. Claire stood at the ridge, chest heaving, mud dripping, her face steady as stone. Mason dragged himself upright, stumbling toward her. His chest heaved, his face flushed with anger, shame, exhaustion. He wanted to yell. He wanted to curse. But when he saw her standing there, calm, unshaken, mud-streaked but resolute, the words died. The sailors moved aside as Admiral Harris walked forward, boots crunching in the grass. His face was unreadable. He stopped between them, his gaze sweeping first to Mason, muddy, gasping, eyes down. Then to Claire, steady, silent, eyes forward. Harris's voice carried across the field. Lieutenant Clark. Mason straightened weakly. Sir, you mistook arrogance for leadership. You mistook pride for strength, and you nearly destroyed your own credibility today. Mason swallowed hard, his face burning. Then Harris turned to Claire. Ensign Donovan. Her chin lifted. Sir, you carried more than yourself today. You carried discipline, restraint, and the will to finish. That mark on your arm isn't what makes you worthy. What makes you worthy is what you just proved. To all of them. To yourself. He let the silence hang, then said with deliberate weight, Your father would not just be proud, he would be honored. The words rippled through the sailors like a wave. Mason's shoulders slumped, the fight drained out of him. The mockery, the laughter, it was gone now. Forever. Because the Admiral had spoken the truth aloud, and no one on that field would ever forget it. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Mason stood alone at the edge of the field. He stared at the mud on his hands, at the grass beneath his boots, at the weight of everything he had lost, not to Claire, but to himself. Claire approached quietly, stopping a few feet away. You're not my enemy, Mason, she said softly, but if you keep chasing ghosts of pride, you'll never find peace. He didn't answer. He just turned and walked away. That evening, Claire sat by the water, the waves brushing the shore. She rolled up her sleeve, looking at the tattoo once more. The lines were sharp, the symbol clear. But for the first time, she didn't see it as a weight, she saw it as a torch. A reminder that sacrifice and honor never die. They live on, in those willing to carry them. Behind her, Admiral Harris's voice broke the silence. You didn't just prove yourself today. You reminded them all why legacy matters, why sacrifice matters. That mark will never be a joke again. Claire turned, meeting his eyes. It never was, sir. Harris gave the faintest smile. No, it never was. And as the sun set over the base, the laughter that once mocked her was long gone, replaced by silence, respect, and something stronger. The tattoo was no longer just ink on her arm, it was a story, a history, a promise, and now everyone knew its meaning.